Hey everyone, Sean here with a very special edition of Spoiler Alert. It is Halloween season, as you know, and we have teamed up with Fangoria, the magazine that has been the first in Fright since 1979, and I love that slogan. We are lucky enough to be joined by a pair of people from Fangoria today. So first up, let me introduce Phil Noble Jr., Emmy-winning television and documentary writer-producer, executive producer of the acclaimed 2019 film Horror Noir. Since 2018, he has been the editor-in-chief of Fangoria magazine. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me just a little bit about yourself.
I think you just covered it, didn't you? That was a lot. That was a mouthful. Well, what to tell you? I mean, as you say, I've been editing Fango since 2018. Lifelong fan of all kinds of movies, but horror was the thing that lit the fire for me as a kid. And, as I went through life and did all kinds of other things that are tangential to movies, it was, a weird turn of fate that brought me back to Fango as it was being relaunched. And, it's a weird spot that I find myself in, that I get to be editing the magazine that got me into movies in the first place.
That is awesome. And we will get back to that because there's a lot more I want to know. But I want to next up introduce our next guest. We have Jason Kozlerich, the creative director at Fangoria. So he is the guy behind the magazine layouts. He runs social, so that's who you can blame for all the memes. He assists with all sorts of creative needs at Fango. He's also an art director. He was the art director on Mental Health and Horror. It's a documentary. He's a producer on Talking Bay 94, Star Wars podcast. Great title. He's a Pokemon trainer and an Eagle Scout. Jason, that's a mouthful. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going? I've been into horror and science fiction, since as a kid, and I've had a lot of jobs in advertising, and always had a hobby off to the side doing, nerd type stuff. And after a while, I ended up getting to work at Fangoria and started off doing marketing, social media, and now I'm working on the magazine, which is exciting. Something that my teenage self would never believe.
It is amazing. And actually, again, I want to hear your journeys and everything. And we'll get to that. First off, I want to introduce my amazing co-host, always with me, Alana, rocking that really excellent Fangoria Need for Speed poster in the background. How are you doing, Alana?
Hey, Sean, I'm really excited to be here. And yes, we have our Fangoria poster. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to hear from Jason and Phil, sorry.
It is 8 a.m. here in Australia.
Yeah.
So it hasn't had a coffee yet.
Literally, I have not had my coffee this morning. I'm like, I'm going to go in without a coffee, see how I do. Oh. And obviously that was a test, so I should have had my coffee.
Oh, brave. Yikes. And our last guest, you know him, you love him. One of our artists here on Need for Speed No Limits, my good friend Sahan, who has... he worked with us and for Fangoria to create these amazing raps and a lot of the things that you're seeing in the game. Sahan, good morning. How's it going?
Morning. Yeah, it's going pretty well. As good as 8 a.m. can be.
Well, I know you normally aren't jumping on calls this early in the morning, so we really appreciate it.
This is good. Yeah, looking forward to this.
Now, Phil, I'll start with you. So you kind of mentioned a little bit, but like what got you started in horror and what has your journey been like, that did bring you to Fangoria? I know you kind of touched on it, but what's your background? Let's hear all about it.
Good Lord. Well, it's, horror was the thing that my older siblings would tell me about before I could even watch it. Halloween was a bedtime story to me before it was a movie I could watch, because they saw it and then they came back and tell me the story of it to scare me. And famously on my 11th birthday, I was taken to see American Werewolf in London, and I made it to the part where Griffin Dunn is talking with his throat torn out and had to be removed from the theater in tears. But, Fango was a way around that stuff. It taught me that these things that were terrifying me were actually the result of a lot of talented craftspeople and artists. And that, it sort of cured my fear of horror, but it sparked a love of filmmaking and of craft. And I was always fascinated by it. I dabbled in filmmaking as a younger person, and then fell into more practical means of production, nonfiction television, documentary work, that kind of thing. But I always loved talking about movies, and absent finding people to talk about movies with, I started writing about movies on the internet just for fun, just for something to get it out and to connect with other people. And I ended up writing for a website for about 8 years called Birth Movies Death, and I would review movies, write about movies. I had sort of carte blanche there, and And that writing got me sort of noticed by the folks who bought Fangoria in 2018. And they invited me to pitch what a 2018 Fango would look like, because it had run aground some years before. And I guess they liked my pitch, which was, make it the thing for your adult self that you remembered as a kid. How do you make it exciting for an adult the way it was exciting as a teenager? And the idea was to make it analog, so it's not online. It's print only. It's a quarterly, so that there's some anticipation between issues, because 10 months fly by now as older selves. So stretch that out. Make it only 4 times a year. Make it feel like an event. And that was sort of the starting point, and we've been building on that model ever since. So, and Jason came on board as a designer, and it's just been a work in progress. And if I'm Captain Kirk, Jason is my Spock, and my McCoy and my Scotty all in one.
So I just kind of want to follow up. So yeah, you kind of talked about how you were kind of brought in and you kind of reimagined or reinvented Fangoria. So just for the folks at home, can you give us just a very brief history of what Fangoria magazine is and was, I guess?
Sure, I'll do my best. It was started in 1979 as a magazine that was planned to be called Fantastica. And it was advertised in the pages of Starlog magazine as a magazine covering horror, genre, Doctor Who, and the first couple of issues had Saturday morning cartoons in it and science fiction, and it was not a horror magazine. But somewhere between advertising that first issue and publishing that first issue, someone threatened a lawsuit over the title, and it very hastily was renamed Fangoria, which I believe is a bastardization of Phantasmagoria. They just sort of squash it to fit it across the front of the magazine. And then the very first issue, there was an article about Dawn of the Dead and the effects work of Tom Savini. And that's the article that got all the mail, right? Everybody got very excited about that piece. And the publishers very quickly realized that there was a market for covering horror and contemporary horror. The only other horror thing that was sort of big at the time was Famous Monsters, which was very much a retro, talking about Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and whatnot. And no one was really giving the spotlight to contemporary horror. So Fango found its niche by, I'd say, issue 7 or so, and has been various versions of that for the past 42 years. It had different tones and different vibes. And the 42 years means that the Fango that someone who's 30 years old grew up with is different than the Fango who someone who's 45 years old grew up with. So it's meant different things to different generations. And Jason and my job now is to sort of come up with a version of that is contemporary, that feels that can serve the current generation and hopefully the next one, but also is aware of those previous generations and hears and honors them as well.
Yeah, the history of that is just so interesting, and I think what people don't realize, is that Fangoria, when I was a kid, obviously I'm old enough to remember when there was no internet, and Fangoria is kind of where you went, to kind of, see these behind the scene things and almost connect with other people that were in. It was almost like a secret club in a way, it was kind of that way that you connected with other horror fans.
Absolutely. And especially in the 80s when there was literally no internet, right? That was the only thing you had. And there were classifieds in the back where you could write and have pen pals and stuff. I don't know if anybody ever did get a pen pal from the back pages of Fangoria, but people were desperately trying every time I looked in the back pages. And, as the 90s progressed, the magazine became a little less disreputable. Whereas in the 80s, the talk show hosts were holding it up as something that was demoralizing the youth. And in the 90s, it got a little more studio friendly, so you'd see Addams Family on the cover or Jurassic Park and that kind of thing. And then once 2000, by the 2000s, it was competing with the internet and struggling a bit, but it had its own voice in the 2000s as well. But by 2016, it's I think some leadership problems caused it to stop being published. And in 2018 is where we came in.
Wow. Phil, I have a question. Did you have those ringtones back in the day, the 2000s, at the back of the magazine where you could text in and get a horror ringtone? That's the only thing I remember from magazines.
I don't know. I wasn't reading it in the 2000s, I have to confess. But I hope they were doing that. They were literally trying to make money on anything. They were selling you like Fangoria coffee, and they were trying to make Fangoria ice cream for a while. If they slept, right, exactly, sells itself. If they were sleeping on the ringtones, then that's a knock on them, I'd have to say.
Yeah, I reckon that was probably one of the coolest things back in the day. I never paid for them because I think they were like $5 a ringtone or something ridiculous. But I just remember all those magazines. But yeah, how we've changed, how we've come a long way. Jason, I'm going to ask you a question. You have a pretty eclectic background yourself, as we heard earlier from Sean. How did you get into horror and end up at Fangoria and then making memes for a living?
Yeah, I got into horror through my mom. She saw that she bought me my first VHS box set of Star Wars, and she's like, okay, he's doing okay with that. Watch Halloween, and then watch the Alien and Aliens, and then after that she's like, I don't care to watch this anymore. So I just allowed to watch whatever I wanted. Then in high school I worked in the electronics department at a store, and I would stock all the DVDs, and so I would always either put ones that I thought were cool off to the side or make note of them and go rent them. So I just start watching a lot of movies that way. And then it just kind of stuck with me, horror and science fiction and all that kind of stuff. And had mentioned earlier, before there was internet, there was, Star Wars Insider and then Fangoria. And I think Phil, you had mentioned it because I didn't start reading it until like the 90s. And I think the Jurassic Park issue was the one that caught my eye because dinosaurs was everything to me as a kid. And through that, it's how I got introduced to Fangoria. And I wasn't allowed to buy it because most of the covers had, some gory images, so I couldn't bring it home. But I had, a friend's older brother that had them all, and I'd be able to read them that way. And just it stuck with me throughout, college and all this kind of nerd horror and science fiction stuff. And it just always was a hobby, whether like going to conventions, and then ran a website with a friend when I was back up in Dallas, and that's how it kind of led into Fangoria. And so that's kind of how I got that gig. And that was starting off doing marketing and advertising and running social. And yeah, the memes part of it, I worked at a social media advertising agency. And so I kind of had to keep up with it. And that was the fun part of the job. But I was always for clients that were like selling tires or medical equipment. And then I got to like go do fun memes for, a fun brand. And Fangoria's just been fun place to do that at. And every time I do one, I always just say to myself, what am I doing? No one's going to find this funny. And, a percentage of the time people find them funny. And it's just been a lot of fun.
He doesn't always say it to himself. Sometimes I'll get a text at 1 a.m. Is this anything? Yes, this is good. Post this. It's very funny.
At 1 a.m, anything seems good. Oh, sure.
I'm asleep. Go. Yeah.
That's so great to hear. I love your journey. And Sean, you also worked in a movie store, didn't you, back in the day?
Well, I worked at a movie theater.
There you go.
Yeah, but it's a very similar thing, and I think I would imagine people who have like that Fangoria like touch point, from like I guess my generation or whatever. It was a bit of an underground thing. You're talking about how you had to like get it from friends, and your mom would like my mom was the same. I mean, she was a very, very cool lady, but man, anything that was gory, she was like, no, you can't have that.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And Sahan, I want to ask you about the cool car wraps that you created. Can you take us through the process of some of the wraps that you did for our Fangoria collaboration?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess we had a lot of conversations with Fangoria in regards to what they wanted to see. So that's kind of the initial kickoff with it. But they provided a lot of assets to us, which is great. The chainsaw skull from the awards, that sort of that award trophy was, really cool. I love the art for that. So we decided to use that on one of the wraps. I tried to stay true to a bit of some of the effects that were used in the wraps, like the goriness to it, or sort of the use of the barbed wire and that. And we kind of we actually wrapped a car with the barbed wire and those tools, which was really cool. And, just to nerd out a little bit on, design stuff, I actually really love the Fangoria logo and the way they've designed that. Like it's got a really nice stylistic use. So we tried to use that quite a bit too. And then there was a second wrap, which was more inspired by slasher films and the grunge and grit and that sort of decrepit textures that you get in a lot of horror movie posters. So that's where I drew inspiration from that, and to try and tie into the sort of broad genre of horror and kind of how the magazine also covers that too. Which is basically where I got the inspiration from. And then, the rest of the sort of game does, and the players, I guess, do the other creative part of it, which is they get to apply colors to it or colors to the cars and that, and make it their own. So, we also did wheels too, which is cool, and also was inspired from that grungy textury feel. Yeah, so hopefully players will have a lot of fun with this one. Can't wait to see the sort of customization ideas they come up with.
Yeah, thanks, Ahan. We're really excited to see that. So we do have 2 wraps. One can be purchased in our MTX store, and the other is available through a mission as well. But yeah, like Sahan said, you can mix your colors up. You can make it your own. Please tag us in all your Fangoria wraps. We'd love to see them and share them across all of our socials.
I think one other thing that we should mention is that we really kind of walked a fine line in doing this. And Sahan, you can kind of like, tell the guys here, like we literally had to kind of go back and forth with some of our manufacturers because it was too gory.
Yeah, some car manufacturers don't like to be associated with some of the things in horror films, which is understandable. You have gore, blood, all those sorts of things. So when you're driving, so there was some back and forth with manufacturers on that part, just to get things approved, so we can kind of show. Do things like in the magazine ad, and also show people outside of the game what these wraps are going to represent. But yeah, that was kind of fun, and we know that now. I mean, we kind of know that, but we do tread a fine line with them and try to push it and get some fun stuff in there too.
They're not big on a sort of a vehicular homicide look, where roadkill type situation. A lot of blood on the fender there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's a tricky part. Usually work with manufacturers, but yeah, it's always fun to keep them on their toes, I guess.
But we did get it over the line, so that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Nice. How do we get a poster like Alana has on the wall there?
Oh, we should send you some.
Yeah,
let me get a poster. Come on.
The least we can do.
Very cool. Mm-hmm.
So Phil, we've kind of touched on this before, kind of like the history of Fangoria, but it's been around for, like you said, like 42 years, which is massive. I mean, not everything has a staying power that long, especially something that started off as like a magazine. So I guess my question is like, you're kind of not necessarily competing with the internet, but I mean, there is kind of like, you've got this whole, if you're into horror, you can find a community online, you can go on Reddit, you can do all these things. So, how has Fangoria kind of found that staying power?
Well, they haven't. That's why they went out of business for a little while. But I think the challenge that Jason and I have is how do we make this an alternative to digital information that you're getting on the internet? And certainly we're a massive presence online between Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and our burgeoning website, which is growing now. But I still pitch the magazine as an alternative to the internet. It's not going to hurt anybody to unplug for a couple hours every couple of months and pick up a printed collectible. I mean, Jason the blood is glossy on this. It's beautiful. Oh, it's really nice. Yeah, I don't know if you can pick that up there, but the blood spatter is just shiny. It's great.
Nothing like that tactile feel, right?
Yeah, and honestly, and we put a lot of work into the writing and the articles, but we do view the product itself as a collectible. So you can read other stuff on Fangoria.com, and you can get your daily news or weekly news from our newsletter, which is an email newsletter that comes out every week. But the magazine, we had to make it like, not a grail, but something special, something you wanted to pick up and hold and have and own and put on the shelf. And the shelf thing was like why we moved from a sort of stapled version to a spine, perfect bound. Mm-hmm. But making it something that you as an adult want to attain versus just something to consume and burn through, which is maybe what it used to be and what the internet is now, right? So there's a real collect them all mentality happening with the magazine now. And since January, we've started doing 2 covers to sort of like incentivize folks to subscribe and get an exclusive cover, or the newsstand cover is an option, or you can get both. So it's a work in progress, and we're still experimenting and trying different things out. Like we did a glow in the dark cover this summer that I was real excited about as a 70s kid. And Jason's got some cool ideas for our January issue that we probably can't talk about yet. But, the idea that it's reconnecting you with something that existed before the onrush of digital information, I think is still the thrust of our philosophy at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think as you mentioned, as Sahan mentioned, I think having that tactile thing that you can go back to. I mean, I used to collect comic books back in the day, and there's I still will read them online and stuff, but there's just nothing like having that periodical right in your hand that you can like go back to and look at, and it's a good thing, right?
And we weirdly just without knowing it, we've gotten so immersed in like internet and digital information and stuff that we catch ourselves geeking out over like paper choices and finishes and like, ooh, this paper or this paper. And you really get in the weeds with that stuff in terms of like, how does this feel versus how does this feel and how heavy does it make it? Because it's 100 pages now, and that's significant. Creates postage problems, believe it or not, if we're not choosing the right weight of paper.
Sure.
Yeah, like it's like mailing a bowling ball to somebody sometimes. and, like what happened when it shows up? But yeah, we're enjoying creating an item, right? It's not just information and it's not just content, but it's a thing. It's a piece of art when it's done right, I think. And that's sort of like the unexpected fun part about the gig, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. That's awesome. And moving to Jason. So Jason, you're a Pokemon trainer. Can you please tell us a little bit more about this, as I'm dying to know?
Sure. Outside of the horror stuff, at the same time as I guess around Jurassic Park and all that stuff, Pokemon was a thing with Red and Blue, and I got into that, and I've just been playing it ever since. And then, it blew up really big with Pokemon Go, and during, lockdown and the pandemic, I've been playing a lot of that. It gets me out of the house. So yeah, and then I play all the new Switch games, and it's just a lot of fun. I have a Pokemon tattoo that I got as a social media poll when I used to work on GameStop social media. I let people vote on what I would get, and that was it. And so yeah, I very much do like Pokemon on top of horror and science fiction.
Yeah, and being such a big fan of video games as well, what's it like seeing Fangoria entering the world of mobile gaming?
I mean, it's pretty wild that, this brand that's been around before video games really blew up to what they are right now. And now we are in a mobile game that looks better than the games I played when I was a kid. It's insane, NES or SNES. And, this looks as good as, Xbox games, but in your hand, you can go play wherever, you can cast it to your TV. And now the brand that, I liked as a kid, I now work on, and now it's now in a video game, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's a full circle, isn't it? Like working on a magazine that you loved when you were younger, and then playing video games, and now your magazine's in a video game. Like it's just, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then I grew up and I was in Okinawa, Japan for high school, and the drifting culture is big there. So it's like, oh, now I can get an AE86 and have the Fangoria logo on it. So I'm pretty excited about that when it all launches.
Amazing.
You've got to post that online, and let us tag you and everything. That would be amazing.
Definitely.
So what I'm curious about, and I love doing this, is that, obviously Fangoria is steeped in horror. We've all worked on this thing. So my question for everyone, and I'll go around here, is like, what is everyone's, favorite piece of horror media? Now, it doesn't have to be, movies, shows, books, games. I mean, there's so much out there now, and we're kind of living in like a new golden age in terms of like all this horror stuff that's around. So, Jason, I'll start with you since we just wrapped up.
Sure. Like the magazine, and it's a physical product. I like to buy physical movies, so Blu-rays and DVDs. And The remasters that Criterion has done with like all the David Lynch movies, like Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, those are some of my favorite pieces of physical media that I have, because the movies are beautiful themselves, but then there's all these extra special features that go a deep dive into the movie, just much like Fangoria does when it's talking about movies or interviewing the artists that worked on them.
Yeah. Oh man, the David Lynch movies, and especially Eraserhead, is like a whole different level of horror.
Yeah. It's not what you would think. It's not, a slasher or anything, but it's just unsettling, and you don't know what's going on half the time. And then you watch it like your fifth and sixth time, and then you're like, oh, now I kind of know what this means. I didn't grasp that concept when I was in high school watching it. And then, 10 years later, I'm like, oh, these themes make much more sense now.
Yeah, just a very unsettling movie filled with dread. And just thinking about it, it's actually one of my brother's favorite movies. So we used to watch it quite a bit. So I didn't even think about that, but yeah, just even think about it now. Creepy movie. Good choice. Sahan, Mr. Car Rap, what is something that you kind of grew up with? What like your horror favorites?
Yeah, so I didn't have the best start with horror. Like about 6 or 7, I'm pretty sure my brother introduced me to It, the Stephen King movie, that 1986 version, and that ruined me for clowns, for everything, for horror for a long time. But yeah, as I got older, I got into it a bit more. I really love The Shining. The Shining is probably one of my favorite movies in general. Just a good classic sort of Kubrick film, I guess. And then at the moment, I'm liking a lot of parody sort of horror things, like What We Do in the Shadows. It's not really parody, it's more maybe satire, but like that show is great. The original movie is also awesome. So, that sort of stuff is always fun to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. What We Do in the Shadows is amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
It's so good. Phil, what about you?
My favorite piece of horror media? Well, obviously it's Fangoria magazine.
Obviously.
4 times a year, available at fangoria.com. Subscribe now. Let's see. So I will go and watch any piece of trash that's got the words Texas Chainsaw and Massacre in it. I drove 2 hours to see the last one, and it was bad. The new one went right to Netflix, and I'm very sad that I won't be able to see it at the theater. But that's sort of my forever franchise. And to Jason's point, movies from the 70s that I was too young to see in theaters and watched on terrible VHS as a young person, seeing them remastered now, any of the classics from the 70s, whether it's George Romero's stuff or whether it's, even like a Kubrick film, like they look better than they literally ever have. So to me, that's really exciting that I get to see these films in perfect condition after years of watching them in a pan and scan, 480 VHS cathode ray tube televisions. It's a gift. It's a real gift that we get to see these movies restored to their glory and are able to watch them on television sets that we couldn't have imagined as children. It's a glorious time.
Yeah, it is totally amazing. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre, yeah, one of the original one I remember seeing as a young child. Very scary. Jason, you're out in Texas. Do you ever get any Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes living out that way?
Not in Austin or Dallas. Phil and I, we were for a film festival. We did drive out to the gas station from the original movie, and because now they've converted it into like a hotel plus barbecue joint, but yeah, the gas station's still there, and they have some of the other memorabilia from the movie at that place. But I haven't been to any places where I'm very sweaty and there might be a guy with a chainsaw about to murder me.
That you know of.
I love that it's also a barbecue joint. I mean, that's so Texas. It's so
absolutely
amazing.
The house is now a restaurant.
Is it?
Yes, I've been there twice. It's about 2 hours outside of Austin, but you can go and eat in the dining room of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know what's on the menu, but
that is actually like a whole other thing, is like actually going to like the places these things were filmed. I mean, we could get into that. I mean, yeah, I've done some cross country road trips and done that kind of thing. So anyway, Alana, you're up next. Horror.
Yeah.
Jam.
I'm not a big gory horror person. I kind of like more ghost stories and yeah, that kind of, cause I don't know, I just can't deal with gore. But I really like the Conjuring series just because they're not like the spin-offs, but the actual Conjuring 1 and 2, because I like that they're based off true stories and ghost vibes. And yeah, I love that kind of thing. And I even went to the Winchester Mystery House, and I was in America a couple of years ago, and that was so cool, like being in the room where they did like seances. And yeah, I love that kind of, I don't know if it's horror, it's like still spooky stuff, but yeah, the ghost side of things.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in the Midwest in a very old house. It was surrounded by a cornfield, and you know, ghost stuff always freaked me out.
Oh God, that scares me so. If your whole house is haunted, I'd leave straight away. I couldn't stay. I like watching it, but to live it, no thanks.
I would say I was thinking about this, as we started working on the Fangoria, collaboration and stuff, and growing up, and I just was thinking back to like all of the what Fangoria kind of what I remember from my childhood. And it's like, yeah, those crazy VHS covers, that everyone you see like in the video store and Fangoria magazine and stuff. So I've got a lot of horror that I actually really like. Probably my favorite pure horror movie would be John Carpenter's The Thing. But I was like, one thing that probably doesn't get a lot of mention. It's not necessarily horror, but I love this movie from the 80s called The Monster Squad, which is like a group of kids, and they're all into horror. And yeah, if anyone hasn't seen that, check it out.
Yeah, it's a good one. Andre, who's the lead in that movie, is a friend of ours. He's a good dude. He's still out there, and you can catch him at conventions and whatnot. He did a whole documentary about Monster Squad fans called Wolfman's Got Nards, and you can rent it on Amazon or whatnot. It's a fun watch.
Amazing. Yeah, I highly recommend it to everyone. So as we wrap up, I kind of want to throw this out there. What's next for Fangoria? Obviously, been around for so long. Started off as like you said, like a staple magazine. Now it's a little more premium, and you're in the digital space. What's next? You're dipping your toe into video games, obviously.
Yeah. And, one thing that someone put in front of me that I hadn't really thought about is that the video games are at this point a bigger industry than movies. So I need to stop being such an old man and start covering video games in a more meaningful way. And we're looking at, and I can't tell anything more about it, but we're looking at putting our first video game on the cover in 2022. And I don't think a video game's been on the cover of the magazine before. I hope I'm not wrong, but someone will tell me if I am. But yeah, it's exciting. And, separate from what Jason and I are doing with the brand, there's a whole production side of the brand that's getting into original films. And we'll be hearing more about those in 2022, but they're not quite our department, but we'll be excited to tell more about them when it's time.
Awesome. Can't wait. Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. This has been amazing. Jason, Phil, Sahan, Alana, of course, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. Everyone else watching, thanks so much for joining us on this, and we will see you at the starting line.